What's up, internet? Let's look at making some risers. So in a previous tutorial, I looked at making some build-ups, breakdowns, and stuff like that, and I used some samples from a sample bank for those risers. And that made me wonder if I've actually done a tutorial about creating your own risers from scratch. And also, in a previous tutorial where I was using Cubase 8, I mentioned a technique which it looks like the newest Cubase 10 update has nerfed. So it doesn't look like you're actually able to do that same technique anymore. However, I have found a workaround, and it is actually a little bit better of a way of doing this because it gives you a little bit more control over how the sound sweeps and stuff like that. Anyway, I'm going to save that for the end of this video because if you have been sticking around, you probably have seen that tutorial before. So yeah, these are the types of sounds we're going to be creating today. So like I said, in a previous tutorial, I used a couple of samples of sort of more white noisy type of sweeps in this track. After listening to it for a bit, I started to feel like they were a little bit bland, and I wanted to maybe take some elements from the track and maybe create my own variations of white noise sweeps and stuff like that to create more variations across the entire track and not kind of use the same sort of samples over and over again. I mean, you can do that, and a lot of the time it will go unnoticed. But anyway, so yeah, first things first, let's create some simple white noise sweeps. So I'm going to be using Serum for this, but it'll pretty much work in any VST, as long as the VST's got a noise generator. So I mean, pretty much any of the VSTs that are built into your DAW should work. One of the reasons why I really enjoy using Serum for the sweeps and that kind of thing is because you get the ability to draw in your sort of sweep shapes and stuff like that. And I find it's a little bit more of a sort of user-friendly and creative way of creating these kind of sweeps. Because, say for example here, like we want to create a sweep over this 8-bar pattern. We know, okay, let's set this to 8 bars, and we can draw in our curves for any sort of parameters within Serum. So I end up going here, and basically like what I'll usually do is I'll just create like a ton of variations and bounce them out, and then, you know, I might use them in this project, I might use them in a future project, and what I'll do is I'll actually upload a bunch of them to my Patreon for my $5 supporters. But as you can see, I mean, it's a pretty easy thing to do, so I mean, if you are wanting to like create your own unique ones, then this is sort of how I would usually go about that. So again, with Serum, you've got like a huge variety of different types of noise. So again, it's another reason why I like to, you know, use this plugin, because you can cycle through a bunch of them and kind of find the one that suits what you need. So let's just say, for example, start with ARP White. What we can do is we can drag this LFO over here onto the level, and now we've created a volume automation for that kind of sweep. I mean, you can do it with automation in the actual plugin itself, but I find, you know, rather than, you know, we might want to like use this to sweep the pitch or something else as well in the patch. And rather than having to go and draw in a bunch of different automation lanes, just having a couple of LFOs to choose from is just much easier. So let's go and draw in one long MIDI note over here. This might even be too long. We might reduce it to 4 bars, but let's just see what's sort of going on so far. Okay, we're going to want to set this trigger on so that when we trigger the note, it starts that sort of sweep. I think my bars were slightly off the actual song's grid, so it did a bit of a thing. So yeah, you want to make sure that that trig is on. So it's super simple, but again, like I said, now you've got the ability to create a bunch of variations, how it like sweeps in and sweeps out We can put filters on here. I like to use high pass filters. You just want to make sure that you set this noise on over here. So now we can either like create a LFO to sweep it, or we can just leave it at a sort of static volume. I generally, especially when using white noise, because it's a full frequency sound, I generally end up cutting out the low frequencies anyway, so why not do it in the actual sample itself using a filter or something like that. Let's put on some effects, maybe a bit of delay and reverb. So, like I said, we can actually get this LFO to modulate something like the pitch or something like this. You may not want to, take things this crazy, so you might just want to like do it a little bit or a lot, depends. White noise doesn't actually have a specific kind of like fundamental tone to it, as far as I know. So it's not going to be like, you don't have to worry about it working with the key of the track, if that makes sense. You can kind of just go wild here, create all sorts of crazy variations. So quite a nice trick also is to boost the resonance a little bit and then sweep the cutoff slightly with that same sort of riser effect. And, depending on when you want it to kind of like fall out, if there's a break or something like that, then you can adjust those. So what I'll do here is I'll actually just go ahead and I'll bounce out a couple of variations of these at different sort of like bar sizes and stuff. I'll maybe have one where the sort of pitch is changing, one where it's not changing, and all sorts of stuff like that. So like I said, I'm going to bounce out a couple of variations here, and then I'm going to upload those to my Patreon for my $5 supporters. What's also cool is to play with effects like flanger and phaser, the type of effects that kind of have like LFOs on them, and then, modulate the speed of that kind of sound using the sort of fade curve that we've created as well. You could go upwards or downwards, depending. You could use both a flanger and a phaser. That might get a little bit overboard. So this rate over here, this would be the sort of speed at which the flanger is flanging. So downwards would obviously be slower. So here what's going to happen is it's going to start fast and slow down as it goes quicker to the rise, or as it gets closer to the rise. Let's hear what that sounds like. Cool. So in this instance, speeding it up sounded a little bit better, in my opinion. So let's go with that. Let's also apply some of this LFO to the feedback, so it gets a little bit more drastic as it gets closer to the build-up. I generally stay away from feedback on 100% on this guy, because it can get a little bit wild. But getting close to it can sound pretty good. So let's hear what this sounds like. Okay, so we've made a bunch of white noise riser type variations. Now let's look at creating some sort of more tonal sort of risers and stuff like that. So one thing I like to do is to use a sampler track and to use maybe a piece of a synth or something that already features in the track. Similar to how I outlined in the resampling tutorial, where I took that lead and kind of chopped it up and stuff like that and put it into a sampler track. But there's a couple of parameters I want to show you guys which are really cool for creating risers out of those sort of lead sounds. So what I want to do is I actually just want to grab a little sort of chop of my Thorn lead that I already bounced out. Cool, so this is the lead that I made in that previous sort of Thorn metallic lead tutorial. What I'm going to do is I actually just want to grab one chunk of it. Let's look for which one is the best. I think it's that one is like the most sort of solid and stable sounding of the lot, I guess you could say. So I like to just bounce it out again using this sort of audio bounce. That way it kind of captures just that sound rather than importing the entire loop and then, highlighting just those sounds in the play area, if that makes sense. So then we can right click and say create sampler track. So here we can actually go ahead and remove this channel or just mute it, and then let's create one long MIDI. Why is this on triplets? I'm not doing triplets here, don't worry. One long MIDI. And okay, so here in sampler track, what we want to do is we want to set this to loop mode continuous. So now what it's going to do is it's going to loop that sample over and over again as long as that key is held down. So it might seem nonsensical and it might kind of like loop a little bit out of time. So that's where this pitch control and pitch envelope more specifically comes in handy. So let's just hear what's happening here on this audio track. It might be complete garbage, but we're going to play around with it and make it sound better. So here, let's click on this little envelope icon, and that pops up our pitch envelope. So here we can draw this all the way up to 100%, and then we've got this attack node over here, which we can drag sort of as long as we want. So for some reason, I don't know if it's a user error, but I can't seem to get the sample player or the sampler track to show you the sort of bars. It just shows you seconds or minutes. So what you can do is you can actually load up, or if you've got a ruler track, just check how long. This is about 12 seconds or so, maybe longer. So you're gonna have to drag this along quite far on this bar to about 12 seconds over there, something like that. And you've got the curve control as well, so you can change how it kind of like loops and stuff like that. So as the pitch gets quicker in the sound, it will loop faster and faster, and it creates this sort of effect. The audio starts to kind of like break up and go almost kind of like sort of into like a digital distortion realm as it gets to around there or so. So you can either change the actual envelope itself to longer than the actual bar, so it doesn't reach that point, or you can just turn down the amount so that it no longer reaches that point. Or if you like that kind of sound, you can keep it in and bounce that out as is. So here then what I'll do is I'll just kind of like tweak it to perfection. Then I'll sort of slap some effects on it, maybe a sort of filter, delays, reverbs, that kind of stuff. Cool, that's good enough for now. So now, like I said, I'll usually throw on a couple of effects. I think filter is not necessary here because it's already kind of like a very high frequency sound. So we can just go with like a delay and a reverb. Okay, so if you've been following my channel for quite a while, you probably recognize that sound, or at least that technique that's going on with that sort of synth riser sound. And in a previous tutorial, I outlined how to do a similar sort of thing with a kick drum, but it looks like that same sort of process is no longer available in Cubase, or at least when you try to do it, very different results happen. So I'm actually glad I found this workaround because there's a little bit more control with like the curve. You can kind of set your time beforehand and stuff like that. So I enjoy the fact that they nerfed that because now I found this new technique. And yeah, let me show you guys how it works. So I've got my kick drum here. And what we can do is we can actually load this kick drum into this sampler by opening it up over here, going back to this panel, and then just dragging this like that. So it will usually reset the settings. Unfortunately, it would be nice if they actually retained those settings, but like I said, it's actually very, very simple. You just, I think it was like just under 14 seconds, turn this all the way up like that, create a bit of a curve, turn loop mode to continuous, and we've got a kick riser. So now we've created a bunch of risers which we can, go and like lay out throughout our track. We can replace those sort of ones that we used in the sample banks, or just play with that, or bounce them out and use them in future tracks to have your own sort of variations that you can use. One thing I like to do is some of the ones that I created in the sampler track, they'll kind of start quite abruptly, so it could be nice to kind of automate a fade in on there. The kick channels, the kick risers, you probably don't want to do that. Those you probably want to leave kind of bare. But yeah, let me just arrange these into some sort of sensible order, and you can kind of get like a sort of audio and visual reference of what they kind of sound like together with the track, not just the noise we've been listening to for the last however many minutes. big thanks to IDM Mag, proud supporters of the dance music scene and my channel. Awesome, that is pretty much it. Like I said, I'm going to be uploading all these sort of riser samples and stuff that I made to my Patreon for my $5 supporters. So if you want to know what that's all about, head on over to the link that's going to be somewhere on the screen right now. As always, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. See you guys next time.